Hello, hello. How are y'all doing? So a little bit of background with this tutorial. I guess it's not a tutorial, it's more like a demo of me just sharing brushes. I don't feel very confident teaching people how to shade. I'm still learning that myself, but as far as what brushes I use, I could easily explain that. I will be showing some intermediate skills with shading and software. And if you don't know like what clipping masks are, I definitely recommend checking out other tutorials first. Like I said, this is just a demo, so a lot of people think like, oh, there might be like one brush to rule them all. It's honestly always personal preference. I like changing things up a bit depending on what I want to accomplish with my illustrations. So as a result, there's not one brush I always use. Definitely recommend experimentation. The version of Clip Studio I have is version 1, specifically version 1.13.2. I never updated it, so it's possible that my Clip Studio will look slightly different. I'm also going to cover both free brushes and paid brushes because I use both. I personally have never made my own brushes. I don't really know how that works. I looked into tutorials in the past, didn't find it very interesting, so I'm not going to get into making brushes by yourself. I just use ones that I have found over time. And some of the brushes are already in the default area. I have a little picture of a cat. I'm going to use that as a reference. So I have all these brushes right here. And right now, the one that I like the most for pencil brushes is called Rough Pencil Clip Studio Paint. And that one I got from Sims Art. I'm going to drop in a screenshot I got. So in Clip Studio, they have an assets page. Up here, there's this little symbol and it says Open Clip Studio. That's where you can find the asset page. This is what it looks like when you pull it up. And here you have like Return to Paint. That's the program I'm using right now. And it's down here. Clip Studio Assets, Find Brushes, and more. And there's a lot of things on here. Definitely make use of that. So for this one, I just looked up Sims, S-I-M-Z, and these brushes popped up. My favorite two ones right now are the Watery Smooth CSP and Rough Pencil CSP. And I'm going to be demoing Rough Pencil CSP. And these are free. Oh, all right, let me scoot my, there we go. I have my keyboard a little bit far out. I feel like a cat would be a somewhat good thing to demo on because they have a lot of like texture with their fur and they have like big eyes. I might try to make it more cartoonier than it actually is. Let's see. Been a while since I've drawn a realistic cat. Oh, and by the way, I got this reference photo from Unsplash. I have like commercial-free photos, so I was like, you know what, I'm just gonna use that. I like this brush because it like has good texture. So not only do I just use it for sketches, I also use it for line art. I used this brush in this piece. Kind of see, yeah, the brush kind of outlines. So it could be used for both for sketching and then also for lines. Also, you kind of like shade with it too. Kind of like a real pencil. Kind of nice. And as you can see, yeah, it's a lot darker. The weight is a little bit more, I don't know, sensitive. It's good, yeah, because you can get really light strokes and then really dark ones as well. Now, as for the eraser, I'm just using it's called a vector eraser right now because I use a lot of vectors. The main key is that I like that it's tapered off. Now, I don't remember where I got this eraser. When I switched computers, the default Clip Studio didn't have it, so I don't know. You might have to look that one up. So yeah, big fan of this brush. Good for sketching, good for lining. In this case, just using it for sketching. All right, and then I'm gonna duplicate that. Switch it over here. The other pen I like is the G pen. Now I'm like 99% sure the G pen right here. It comes with Clip Studio, so it's not like purchased. You don't have to download it or anything. I personally like using vectors. So up here, new vector layer. This is where the vector eraser comes in. So the nice thing about vectors is that if you resize it, it doesn't get all pixely, whereas raster pens do. Because like vectors, the way they're designed is that it's like actually a bunch of little like dots and calculations. So we increase them, the program knows to increase things. Here's an example of how vectors would work. Say you have like a line over another line. But you're like, oh, I just want to get rid of this line. You erase it, it just does that. So that's a really nice thing about vectors. It makes cleaning up way faster for me. Like if I go back to this drawing here and I press this button up here, what is this, operation on object? And I click, wait, I'm on the wrong layer. And I click this, you can see these points. So these are the vector points. And you can like move them around if you want. Or you can add more points. If you right click, it'll say add a control point. It took me a while to finally start using vectors. And they're kind of different. If you have used something like Adobe Illustrator, it's a little bit different from it. If you're using like the exact same pen as somebody else, sometimes it'll still be different. Partially because, I mean, like, what did I have? Stabilization 6 over here. It kind of depends on your tablet. Sometimes your tablet has a different pressure sensitivity. And then also up here, if you go to File on the bottom, or close to the bottom, there's pen pressure settings. And it should look like this. This is the one I have right now. But when there is this brush that I like that's kind of painterly, I usually change it when I use that one. But for the most part, I like keeping it at this slope. So I'm gonna see if all my lines are closed. I'm not the best at closing my lines. All right, and then I'm gonna get rid of my pencil copy. So far we got rough pencils and the G pen. You can turn this into a reference layer. There is a fill tool, but if you look up in the Clip Studio assets, it says close and fill tool without gaps. It has the instructions in the page itself. So I'm not going to go over that right now. So I've made this a reference layer. I don't know why they chose it to be a lighthouse, but it is. And then below it, I'm going to put the color. And then I have it over here. You can, oh, you can't really see. Here it is. Here it is. If I did everything correctly, it should work. So we're going to go outline the cat. Hey, there we go. Look at that. That was fast. Opposed to doing this, which is painful to me when I see people do that. Get your pen and you're just like, that's gonna take a long time and you're probably gonna miss a couple pixels. It's like gonna be really bad for your arm in the long run. Don't get me wrong, if you grab like a pencil and start doing that, you can get some pretty cool textures, not gonna lie. But my arm is too messed up and I can't do that. So we do essentially a paint bucket, but like a little bit more advanced. Just make sure that all your lines are on the reference layer. You just have to make sure you don't go over other parts, because then it will also include that. Like usually it doesn't get this, but in this case it does. Whatever, erase it. Doing that with like this pencil, like probably less sketchy, but still. It's better if I just lasso tool it. But for these lines, do quite a bit. This one I'm just gonna like lasso tool it actually. Lasso fill. The lasso fill is right here. I forget where it is when you first download Clip Studio. It's somewhere strange, like, or it's one of these down here. But I moved it up to the selection area. The lasso fill, nice and easy. I'm gonna grab these and do that. And that's a little bit bright. Turn it down a bit. So I've got a couple options here already. From this stage, there's a lot you can do. So I'm gonna copy this, move it down here, and then I'm gonna make a new layer. And right now, I'm just gonna clip it to the whole folder. Usually, yeah, you could do it layer by layer, but just for this, I'm just gonna go ahead and do this quickly. So you can do, I guess, like cell shading. If you're new to shading, I recommend doing cell shading or like kind of like block shading first before you get into like the fancy airbrush stuff. I unfortunately did not do that when I started. I actually started painting before, and it took me a long time to finally start understanding how to shade some things in order for them to look good as far as like cell shading and stuff. So I'm gonna change this into a multiply. We'll see how dark that is. Okay, yeah. Yeah, this isn't like gonna be the nicest shading ever, but mostly just to get the point across that you can shade with a wand. Or, I mean not a wand, with the lasso fill, but I guess you could also shade with the G pen. Here, let's do that too. I guess with the G pen, then you'll have more flexibility on certain textures. And then this is just one color. We can get into like different shading, but for simplicity's sake, just keep it color. I feel like you could do blockier shading than me. The right side of his face is a lot darker, so I'm gonna go in the same brush, just a bigger size. Okay, it's kind of looking a little bit more shaded. And like in this case, I'm just using one color that's set in multiply. It would probably look better if you use different colors, but yeah, that's just me going through it quick. Didn't want to worry too much about color theory since it's more of a brush video than a color theory video. So that's kind of shaded. I'm gonna try to lighten that up, lower the opacity. I mean, it already kind of looks quite different from the first and the top one. So I guess next I will be, this is also on Clip Studio assets page. It's free, as you can see. Yeah, you can just look up water brush. I really like this one. It blends very nicely. I first started drawing with Photoshop, which I hated. And then I changed to Paint Tool Sai, and this brush reminds me a lot of the default brushes in Paint Tool Sai. So that's why when I switched over to Clip Studio, I was like, I need to find something similar, and this was the closest that I could. So here it is on top. Hardness 3, brush density 50. I don't think I modified anything. And in this case, like rather than having like hard shading, oh whoops, forgot to set this to multiply. It's a lot softer. We're gonna have this pink right here. Let's put red over here. So this is already blending into the background color. Yeah, it blends pretty well. That's what I like about it. I think I want to make this a darker color because it's not really popping up here. So that's the thing. Water brush is definitely a little bit softer. Don't want to be like pressing too hard on your tablet. Want to ruin it. So for me, it's harder to color in the lines with this, but there are a couple ways I clean this up. So like right now, this isn't like my favorite way of approaching it, but I don't know. Sometimes I like do one layer and then I go and clean it up. But I feel like it's a very forgiving brush because it could easily blend into other colors. Now, let me see if I can find a finished example of what I've used with water brush. This is a little bit of a mixture, but you can kind of see in the shading down here that I use the water brush. So right here, you can see these sharp lines. I did the lasso tool, but then with the shading itself, I use the water brush. You can kind of see these little like white highlights, water brush right there. What did I use for lining? Oh, I think I used the textured pen, which is also another default one. Instead of G pen, I used textured pen for this one, for the outlines. Lasso for the markings. Water brush for the shading, as well as like the dots. Anything I wanted it to be a little bit softer. I used a lasso tool over here, I think. Yeah, for the hair. And I just used a airbrush for this. I just quickly shaded it. It was just a mask, essentially. And then the very background, I used a gouache brush, which I'll be talking about. So yeah, it's just like a combo. You don't have to do like all these combos. I just like textures. I like being able to change things up. For this jacket, I use this water brush. I guess pretty much for everything right here. You can make like really shiny stuff. And then the tulips as well. In the background, I started using more painterly brushes because, I don't know. I just wanted to have a more blocky look. So that's the example of that. Need to spend more time looking over brushes. Yeah, it's like, it's a balance because on the flip side, I have definitely downloaded way too many brushes. There's definitely some that have sat there neglected and I just kind of forgot about it because like, I feel like it's easy to become overwhelmed with choice. So I guess it's like what look you're going for. But yeah, there's a lot of cool things. I feel like my style changes slightly every time I try to use a very different brush. So I think that's kind of cool. I love this brush. I think it's so cool that it's free. Free is always good. This is kind of a bad example side by side because I use different colors for shading, but I feel like the point still stands. And actually, since I'm feeling fancy, add a little eye shine to it. There we go. Okay, this gouache one. So this one I got off of DeviantArt, so you could just look up gouache brush set from Manga Studio, because that's what Clip Studio used to be called. I think I overlaid some of these in here. Yeah, you can kind of see the texture right here. And this one was like almost 100% gouache brush. I think even the lines were gouache brush. So yeah, it can make a really nice texture, in my opinion. So let's do that one. I think I use Opaque 2 and Opaque 1 a lot. And yeah, there's a lot of texture going on. This one I have to press down a little bit harder. It really gives it a scratchy kind of look, I suppose. Yeah, you could go pretty lightly on it and it could still has quite a bit of an effect. I feel like in a way it's easier to shade bigger spots with this because I felt like I had to be more dainty with this one. I'm gonna try something extra. Multiply and same brush, just bigger. Try to do some lighter strokes. Okay, that makes it really gritty. That might be too much. This is with it on, with it off. I mean, from far away, it doesn't look that bad, but I changed my mind. Now, if you painted it with gouache, I wouldn't say this is like a lot like it, but it is what the brush is called. I'm sure if you try like a different technique that's not like mine, maybe you'll get a more gouache result. But for me, it's just like a really cool texture brush. I think it's good for foliage, personally. I feel like the textured pen is very self-explanatory. Hold on, because this is a vector, I might be able to change it, but sometimes changing it doesn't quite work the way you expect it to. This might work and this might not. Let's see, because on the side here it says tool property, brush size 15, brush shape. Okay, so it only has these brush shapes. What happens if I it turns it into something different, which is actually kind of cool. But it doesn't have the brushes that I have. You have to like import them or something. What does Melody look like? Guys, made of music notes. I use textured pen. It looks very similar. I like it because it's just as clean as G pen, but with a little bit more texture. Pretty self-explanatory. I'm not gonna do the whole thing with it, so I'm gonna delete that. A brush doesn't just have to be a brush for shading. It could be a brush for lining, and a lining brush doesn't have to be just a brush for lining. Yeah, this one's like a lot lighter. This is me using opaque one with a gouache one. I think I'm just gonna do the head. Then I'm gonna go back to the water brush. I realized I didn't do this in order. I also really like lining with that. Now, the water brush is a little bit more transparent. Like, it's very light, but it gives it really nice, soft lines. Sometimes you don't want, like, super intense lines, depending on what you're painting or drawing. Sometimes I duplicate the layer to make it darker. It's too light. That's what I think I did for this piece. I think I used those lines. Water brush line. Gouache opaque one. All of these have been free or in the default, and I think I'm going to go to a paid brush, and that should be the end. I've used Procreate in the past, and actually before using the water brush, I also used this. This is for Procreate, so if you want something similar to the water brush, I found that these brushes by Lilith, they're also free. They're on Gumroad, I believe. They're pretty nice. They also come with all other things like watercolor brush and stuff, so Clip Studio isn't your thing. These brushes are pretty good too. Highly recommend them. I did this illustration. I did this illustration on stream. And I'm trying to remember. I think it was all the watercolor texture. I don't think there was any like flat colors as far as I can tell. This would be an example of how I used it. There is another example that I have that's even older. This one I was just getting kind of used to using them along with the pencil brush. So yeah, you can see pencil and then kind of watercolor. I think there was an additional texture put on top of it. So the paid versions are by the same person who did these freebies, except they're on his Patreon. So this would be an example as a Clip Studio pack, Brush Pack V2, available for tier 3 patrons, which is how I got it. But I think you can purchase them on the side here. They're 24 USD. But I think if you subscribe as a Patreon, you get this and then some. So what I typically used, I would use watercolor and watercolor flat. I don't see the pencil ones anymore. I wonder if they're no longer available. Again, I did do some watercolor in this one too. So pencil and watercolor. I just want that. I'm actually going to delete it And I'm gonna go to my watercolors. So right now I have water brush flat medium. I'm not gonna pick up my brush at all. So it makes this texture here. Now if you want, you can go over it and it could make an additional texture. You just make it a little bit darker here. Because every time you go over it, it gets darker and darker. And sometimes that's a cool texture you're going for, sometimes not. Sometimes I like darker shadows. It's gonna stay selected. I'm gonna hit multiply. Maybe not all the way multiply, maybe like 54%. And we're gonna go back. Even darker shadows. Depending on how much edges you want, depends how many times you pick up your brush, it changes. Otherwise, you're just doing like a big flat wash. Take advantage of the different layers that this brush has to offer. Yeah, I actually really like how that turned out. Yeah, there's a lot you can get done with different effects. And because it is very transparent, if the back of your canvas, I mean like mine is white, if it's a different color, it will change. So like for example, I just did a layer here and I wanted to change the background. You can see it's pretty transparent. So if you don't want that to happen, you're gonna have to go in and like make it white or whatever color you had before. So just something to keep in mind. I kind of like how it looks, but also I kind of want it to not have these lines because they're a little harsh. So I might go with a softer brush. Change the color, lighten it up. Actually, it looks kind of nice. Color of your line art can really change things, make it look a little bit nicer sometimes. Another thing that makes your line art look good is sometimes not just sticking to one color, but using different colors for your line art. So like, for example, red where the tulip is, maybe a dark green where the green is. Okay, so it's a little bit light. I'm just gonna duplicate it. There, it looks a little bit darker now. I guess, yeah, there's a big difference. Exact same shading, just a different brush for different lines. And I like the one on the right, looks a little bit more organic, but the one on the left is also valid. Yeah, even changing the color made it look a little bit less, I don't know, intense. Oh, airbrushes. I forgot about airbrushes. So when I started drawing, a lot of people are like, airbrush is the main one, like, you can do so much with the airbrush. I could not figure it out, but I did find a way to make the airbrush work for me eventually. Airbrush, this little canister looking thing over here. I haven't really messed with like these other ones, spray, droplet, noise. I just have used soft. Grab your airbrush, decide where you want the light to be coming from. So really I want this part to be darker. They got a gradient going on here, although it doesn't have to be that dark. And then here is where you can do masks, because then you don't want to like accidentally mess things up. I think I'm just going to take either the lasso tool or the G pen. In this case, I'm going to just take the G pen, put it on transparent. Instead of coloring the shadows, I'm actually going to be going in with the highlights. Less noticeable at the top here because it's not as dark, but over here, since it's the darkest, it will be more noticeable. I think I'm gonna highlight the eyes a bit. Maybe make this part a little bit darker because you can barely see the highlights here. With this masking layer, if I didn't like how this was going, I could just go back, change it to a dark color, go back. Just be sure you click the masking layer itself, then you don't lose the shading that you have with the airbrush. It took me a long time to get to masking layers, so like no pressure if you don't really get them. I just stuck with clipping masks or clipping layers, and that worked for me for a long time. Yeah, I started using the airbrush when I finally started using line art in my drawings. If I can find an example. Some of these are very old. I like this one. Yeah, you can see there's like a gradient going on here. Yeah, so I grabbed a lasso tool, I drew the fur, and then I went with an airbrush here. It's like a way to use gradients without being like stuck with specifically using the gradient tool. You're just kind of making your own. Oh, how to install brushes? I'm like a little bit late on that one, but I will add it. When you download, a little thing pops up over here and you can just drag and drop. Unfortunately, like Clip Studio, it doesn't really save your settings and all your stuff, so you kind of have to like re-upload everything unless you're like connected to the cloud, but my version is old, so maybe I'm just out of date. But I had to make sure that I saved all my brushes down here. Oh, you can export. If you right click on a brush, you can say export subtool. Go put them, save them into a little folder. That way that if for some reason you lose access to the original download page, you will have your brushes. That's big because there was this brush that I really liked and I was like, oh, no worries. I'll just look it up on the Clip Studio page, and the person deleted it. So I was like, oh, snap. Okay. Definitely start with the free brushes. That's what I would recommend. Like, don't get overwhelmed because there's so many brushes, and just be like, I don't know, narrow it down. Be like, what do I want to accomplish? Do I want a like really clean art style, very like hard edges, or do I want something like more soft looking or textured? So yeah, if you want something more textured, definitely look at watercolor or like gouache brushes. Same thing with like, they have like acrylic brushes, oil brushes. Those also have like a texture to them. I'm gonna go over these real quick. All right, so we got our reference, grabbed the rough pencil, which is free to do the sketch, then cleaned up with the G pen. And you can do this with any pen. This is an example of like using with water brush lines. I do these really quick so they don't look as great. Gouache opaque. And then I started coloring, which this is the flats over here. Pretty basic. I was able to use the, I mean, you could use many different ways to color this in. I use close and fill tool. Once you have your flats, it can be pretty easy. You can just use a lasso and the same brush that you used to line. In this case, I used a water brush. Much softer, easier to blend for sure. Gouache, specifically the opaque one, kind of does this texture. A little harder to blend, but totally doable. And then this is the one that I paid for, which is the watercolor brush, but there are a lot of good watercolor brushes out there. And then I just switched the line art from this one to pencil, and I don't know, it just like gives it a different effect. It looks way more organic in my opinion. And then the airbrush, which kind of gives it a cool moody kind of look. If you throw color theory on top of this, better shading, lighting, this will definitely make your art way better. I just wanted to focus just purely on, this is the brushes I use and this is how I use them. Thank you so much for watching. I know that was a lot of information. I tried to be as thorough as possible because I know some things could be a little bit confusing. I'm very curious if any of y'all use these brushes, so feel free to share in like the Discord or anything. Have a good one. Thank you so much. Bye.